Daddy, I understand that we haven't had a chance to get close in a long time, probably my whole life.
I have a lot of questions, obviously. I'm confused.
The stuff they say in the news is horrible and not true. You know that I love my mama, and you know that I would never hurt her. Just know that I'm innocent and know that I'm still your little girl.
I'm still your little girl. Those words, spoken from behind bars, echo with haunting irony. Just weeks earlier, Gypsy Rose had told her father she was innocent, that the news reports were lies, that she would never hurt her mother. But the courtroom in Springfield, Missouri now knows the truth. Gypsy Rose Blanchard, 24 years old, stands before the judge to plead guilty to second-degree murder, the killing of her own mother. Beneath this confession lies a labyrinth of deception that has captivated a nation. For years, Dee Blanchard presented her daughter as terminally ill and wheelchair-bound, collecting sympathy, charity, and a home from Habitat for Humanity. The shattering truth: Gypsy could walk, could eat, was never sick. The murder was not born from malice, but from a desperate bid for freedom from a prison made of fabricated illnesses and stolen years. Outside, news cameras multiply, broadcasting the unthinkable question: when does a victim become a killer? Before we dive into this twisted tale of manipulation and murder, tell us where you're watching from, and ask yourself, when does survival cross the line into sin? The wood-paneled courtroom in Greene County feels heavier than it should. On this July morning in 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard sits between her attorneys, Mike Stanfield and Clayton Baker, her hands folded in her lap, like a child waiting for permission to speak. She wears a simple gray dress that hangs loose on her thin frame. Her hair, finally growing back after years of unnecessary shaving, falls in soft waves around a face that appears both young and ancient simultaneously. Greene County Prosecutor Dan Patterson stands at the prosecution table, organizing papers with the methodical precision of a man who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. He knows what he holds in his hands, the most extraordinary case of his career. A murder, yes, but also a rescue. An ending that was also somehow a beginning. The gallery is packed. Media representatives occupy every available seat, notebooks poised, cameras prohibited, but memories sharp. They have been following this story since that shocking Facebook post appeared 15 months ago. That bitch is dead. The post that launched a nationwide search and revealed a secret that had been hiding in plain sight for over 2 decades. Judge Jonathan Randall looks down from the bench, his expression neutral, but his eyes betraying the weight of what is about to unfold. This is not a trial, technically. There will be no jury to deliberate Gypsy's fate. She has accepted a plea deal, trading the risk of life imprisonment for a guaranteed decade behind bars, the minimum sentence for second-degree murder in Missouri. Oh, but before the sentence is pronounced, the facts must be laid bare. The public must understand. And so the prosecutor rises to tell a story that sounds like fiction, but is horrifyingly entirely real. Your Honor, Patterson begins, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, what we have before us today is not simply a case of murder. It is a case that challenges our understanding of victimhood, of abuse, and of the lengths to which a person will go to escape a life that is, quite literally, not their own. He pauses, letting the words settle. In the gallery, a reporter's pen scratches against paper. Someone coughs. The air conditioning hums. Gypsy Rose Blanchard stands before this court, having confessed to her role in the death of her mother, Claudine Blanchard, known to friends and family as Dee Dee. But to understand how we arrived at this moment, we must first understand the life that Gypsy Rose was forced to live. A life constructed on lies, maintained through manipulation, and sustained by a mother whose love became a cage. In Springfield, Missouri, outside this courtroom, the community is divided. Some see Gypsy as a cold-blooded killer who manipulated a vulnerable man into murdering her mother for money. Others see a victim who had exhausted every other avenue of escape. The local news runs constant coverage. Facebook groups debate her guilt. Talk shows dissect her story. The case has touched a nerve in American society, raising questions about medical authority, parental rights, and the invisible prisons that can exist within loving families. Patterson continues, his voice steady. The defendant before you was born on July 27, 1991, to Claudine and Rod Blanchard. The couple separated shortly before Gypsy's birth, and Dee Dee raised her daughter primarily alone. From the time Gypsy was an infant, Dee Dee claimed that her daughter suffered from a constellation of severe medical conditions. The prosecutor pulls out a document, the first of many that will be introduced. It is a medical record from when Gypsy was 3 months old. Dee Dee had taken her infant daughter to the hospital, insisting she had sleep apnea and could stop breathing at any moment. Overnight monitoring revealed nothing. The baby was healthy, but Dee Dee was not convinced. As Gypsy grew, so did the list of her supposed ailments, Patterson explains. Dee Dee claimed her daughter had leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, asthma, vision problems, hearing problems, and a chromosomal disorder that kept her mentally functioning at the level of a 7-year-old. She claimed Gypsy needed a wheelchair, a feeding tube, and constant medication. She shaved her daughter's head to mimic the effects of chemotherapy. A juror, though there is no jury today, the gallery serves as one, gasps audibly. How could this happen? How could doctors be fooled? Patterson addresses the unspoken question. Dee Dee Blanchard was extraordinarily skilled at manipulation. She moved frequently, doctor shopping across state lines. She would tell each new physician a carefully crafted story, often claiming that previous medical records had been destroyed in Hurricane Katrina. When doctors expressed skepticism, she would simply find new ones. The story shifts now, moving forward through time. In 2005, after Hurricane Katrina devastated Louisiana, Dee Dee and Gypsy relocated to Missouri, first to Aurora, then later to Springfield. They presented themselves as hurricane survivors, a mother and her severely disabled daughter who had lost everything. The community rallied around them. The Blanchards received assistance from numerous charitable organizations, Patterson explained. The Ronald McDonald House, Make-A-Wish Foundation, and Habitat for Humanity all provided support. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity built them a home on Volunteer Way, a house specially designed with wheelchair ramps and a hot tub for Gypsy's supposed muscular dystrophy. The community donated time, money, and material. They believed they were helping a family in desperate need. In the gallery, a woman who had volunteered on that Habitat build wipes tears from her eyes. She remembers Gypsy, sweet, childlike Gypsy in her wheelchair, always smiling despite her suffering. She remembers Dee Dee, the devoted mother who never left her daughter's side. It had all seemed so real. Patterson introduces photographs next, images of Gypsy and Dee Dee together at Miranda Lambert concerts where they had backstage passes, at Disney World courtesy of Make-A-Wish, at medical appointments clutching teddy bears and wearing hospital bracelets. In every photo, Dee Dee hovers close, her hand on Gypsy's shoulder or wheelchair, protective, possessive. But Gypsy Rose knew the truth, prosecutor says, his voice dropping slightly. As she grew older, she began to understand that she was not sick. She could walk. She could eat regular food. She did not need the feeding tube that her mother insisted upon. She tried to tell people. She tried to escape. A new document appears, a police report from 2011. A neighbor had called authorities after seeing Gypsy run out of the house. Dee Dee explained it away. Her daughter was confused, having an episode, didn't understand her own limitations. The police believed her. They always did. Dee Dee controlled every aspect of Gypsy's life, Patterson continues. She monitored her conversations. She isolated her from peers. She physically restrained her daughter, chaining her to the bed when she tried to assert independence. And she lied about Gypsy's age, telling everyone, including Gypsy herself at times, that she was younger than she actually was. The courtroom is silent now, absorbing the horror of this captivity that wore the mask of maternal devotion. In 2012, at the age of 21, Gypsy Rose met Nicholas Godejohn online through a Christian dating website called ChristianDatingForFree.com. Patterson says she hid this relationship from her mother. For 3 years, she and Godejohn communicated in secret through Facebook messages, late-night chats, stolen moments. Gypsy finally had something that was her own. The prosecutor's tone shifts here, becoming more somber. But Gypsy knew that as long as her mother was alive, she would never be free. She would never have a normal life. She would remain forever trapped in this web of lies and control. And so she made a choice, a terrible, irreversible choice. He pauses, making eye contact with Gypsy. She meets his gaze briefly, then looks down. In June of 2015, Gypsy Rose and Nicholas Godejohn began to plan Dee Dee Blanchard's murder. The words hang in the air like smoke. This is the moment where victim becomes perpetrator, where sympathy must wrestle with the law. Patterson lays out the timeline methodically. The Facebook messages between Gypsy and Nicholas, discussing methods of killing, poison, arson, a gun. Ultimately, they settled on a knife. Gypsy would get the weapon, provide access, and hide, while Nicholas did the actual killing. On June 9, 2015, Nicholas Godejohn traveled by bus from his home in Big Bend, Wisconsin, to Springfield, Missouri, the prosecutor explained. He arrived while Gypsy and Dee Dee were at the emergency room having Gypsy's feeding tube replaced, another unnecessary medical procedure. After they returned home and Dee Dee went to sleep, Gypsy let Nicholas into the house. She gave him duct tape, gloves, and a knife. The gallery is silent. Some people have stopped taking note. They simply listen, unable to look away from the horror of it. Gypsy Rose hid in the bathroom with her hands over her ears. Nicholas Godejohn went to Dee Dee's bedroom and stabbed her 17 times in the back while she slept. 17 times. The number repeats in everyone's mind. 17 times. Not an accident, not a moment of passion. 17 deliberate wounds. Dee Dee woke during the attack. She screamed. She called out for Gypsy 3 or 4 times, asking who was in her room, begging for help. Patterson's voice is quiet now, letting the facts speak. Gypsy remained in the bathroom. She did not help her mother. She did not call for help. After the murder, Patterson explains, Nicholas and Gypsy had sexual intercourse in Gypsy's bedroom, though Gypsy would later claim this was not consensual. They stole over $4,400 in cash from Dee Dee's safe, money that had come largely from Rod Blanchard's child support payments. They took a taxi to a nearby bus station and fled to Wisconsin. Before they left, the prosecutor says, Gypsy Rose posted a message on the Facebook account she shared with her mother. The message read, "That bitch is dead." It was this post, crude, shocking, obviously wrong, that alerted neighbors and friends. It was this post that brought police to the house on Volunteer Way 5 days after the murder. It was this post that revealed Dee Dee Blanchard's decomposing body and began to unravel the twisted truth of the Blanchard family. Police traced the IP address of that Facebook post to Nicholas Godejohn's home in Big Bend, Wisconsin, Patterson explains. On June 15, 2015, authorities arrested both Nicholas Godejohn and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Both confessed to the murder. But here is where the story took another turn, one that shocked even seasoned investigators. When police found Gypsy Rose, she was not in a wheelchair. She could walk, and walk well, according to Sheriff Jim Arnott. She had no feeding tube. She appeared far healthier than anyone expected. Things are not always as they appear, Sheriff Arnott had told the press at the time. This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception. The investigation that followed uncovered the full scope of Dee Dee's deception. Medical records were subpoenaed. Doctors were interviewed. The truth emerged piece by piece. Gypsy Rose had never had leukemia. She had never had muscular dystrophy. She could walk, see, hear, and eat normally. She was not mentally disabled. Every illness, every limitation, every crisis had been fabricated by her mother. Patterson introduces the testimony of Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, a neurologist who had treated Gypsy years earlier. He had suspected something was wrong. His notes mentioned concerns about fabricated illness, but he had not pursued it further. The suspicions had been noted, but not acted upon. The medical community, the charitable organizations, the neighbors, the community at large, everyone was deceived, the prosecutor acknowledges. Dee Dee Blanchard was extraordinarily skilled at what experts now believe was factitious disorder imposed on another, previously known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. She created an elaborate fiction and forced her daughter to live it. This is the crux of the case's complexity. Gypsy Rose committed murder. She planned it, facilitated it, benefited from it, but she was also a victim, a prisoner seeking escape through the only method she believed was available. Patterson presents the final pieces of evidence: the knife used to kill Dee Dee, recovered from Nicholas's home in Wisconsin, surveillance footage showing Gypsy and Nicholas at the Days Inn Motel and Greyhound bus station, DNA evidence placing both of them at the scene, and the recorded confession where both admitted their role. The state initially charged Gypsy Rose Blanchard with first-degree murder, Patterson says, his voice measured. A conviction on that charge would have meant life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, after reviewing the evidence, after understanding the full scope of the abuse Gypsy endured for over 2 decades, the state has agreed to a plea deal. He looks at Gypsy now, his expression complicated. Miss Blanchard will plead guilty to second-degree murder and will be sentenced to 10 years in the Missouri Department of Correction. This is the minimum sentence for second-degree murder in our state. The courtroom erupts in whispers. 10 years. Just 10 years for planning and facilitating a murder. Some people are outraged. Others believe it is too much. The division mirrors the national conversation happening outside these walls. Patterson addresses the concern directly. This is one of the most extraordinary and unusual cases we have seen. When you look at this case, it's murder, and it's first-degree murder. But the circumstances, the abuse, the control, the desperation, these are mitigating factors that cannot be ignored. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is both perpetrator and victim. She deserves punishment, but she also deserves mercy. The judge nods slowly, considering. Miss Blanchard, please rise. Gypsy stands, her attorneys on either side. She is shaking slightly. You have heard the charges against you and the terms of the plea agreement. Do you understand that by pleading guilty to second-degree murder, you are admitting that you planned and participated in the death of your mother? Yes, Your Honor, Gypsy says, her voice small but clear. And do you accept these terms of your own free will? Yes, Your Honor. Then this court accepts your guilty plea. You are sentenced to 10 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections with credit for time served. You will be eligible for parole after serving 85% of your sentence. The gavel falls. It is done. As Gypsy is led away, her attorney, Mike Stanfield, speaks briefly to reporters gathered outside. When I first met Gypsy Rose, she could barely walk from the elevator to the interview room without getting out of breath. She was malnourished and physically frail. Now, after a year in the Greene County Jail, her health has improved dramatically. I can honestly say I've rarely had a client who looks better after doing a prison sentence. That tells you everything you need to know about what she was going through. The prosecutor stands at his own press conference, fielding questions. Could we have gotten a first-degree conviction? Yes, I believe we could have, but it wouldn't have been just. This young woman spent her entire life in a prison created by her mother. She didn't deserve to spend the rest of her life in another one. Not everyone agrees. In the Springfield community, opinions remain divided. Online forums explode with debate. Some argue that abuse, no matter how severe, does not justify murder. Others argue that Gypsy had exhausted all other options, that society had failed to protect her, and desperate people do desperate things. Media coverage intensifies. The story is everywhere. Cable news, true crime podcasts, magazine covers. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone thinks they understand. But there is another trial coming, another courtroom drama. Nicholas Godejohn, the man who actually killed Dee Dee Blanchard, has rejected a plea deal. He wants his day in court. The months pass. Gypsy begins serving her sentence at Chillicothe Correctional Center. For the first time in her life, she has a degree of autonomy. She can walk freely. She can eat what she wants. She can make friends without her mother's interference. Paradoxically, prison offers her more freedom than she has ever known. Meanwhile, Nicholas Godejohn sits in jail, awaiting his trial. His attorneys prepare a defense strategy centered on his autism spectrum disorder and his relatively low IQ. They will argue that he was manipulated by Gypsy, that his mental condition prevented him from fully understanding the consequences of his action. In November 2018, Nicholas Godejohn's trial begins in the same Greene County courthouse where Gypsy had accepted her plea deal 2 years earlier. The courtroom is once again packed with media and curious observers. This trial, unlike Gypsy's plea hearing, will involve a jury, witnesses, and competing narratives about who bears the greater responsibility for Dee Dee Blanchard's death. Judge David Jones presides, his demeanor stern and controlled. He has reviewed the evidence exhaustively and knows this will be a challenging case. The jury selection process is meticulous, finding 12 people who can be impartial about a case that has saturated local and national media proves difficult. Prosecutor Dan Patterson, who handled Gypsy's case, leads the prosecution once more. Across from him sits Dwayne Perry, Godejohn's defense attorney, a man tasked with saving his client from a life sentence. Patterson's opening statement is direct and damning. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defendant, Nicholas Godejohn, traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri with one purpose, to murder Dee Dee Blanchard. He brought gloves and duct tape. He accepted a knife from Gypsy Rose Blanchard. He entered Dee Dee's bedroom while she slept, and he stabbed her 17 times. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of confusion. This was premeditated murder. The prosecutor displays the timeline of Facebook messages between Nicholas and Gypsy, messages that span over a year. In them, They discuss various methods of killing Dee Dee. The messages are disturbing, sometimes romantic, sometimes violent, sometimes mixing the two in ways that make the jury visibly uncomfortable. You will see that Nicholas Godejohn deliberated on this murder for over a year, Patterson continues. He knew what he was doing, he understood the consequences, and he chose to kill. Perry, the defense attorney, presents a different story. Nicholas Godejohn is a young man with autism spectrum disorder. His IQ is 82, functioning at approximately the level of a 10 or 11-year-old child. He met Gypsy Rose Blanchard online and fell blindly in love. She told him about her mother's abuse. She told him she needed to be free, and she asked him, repeatedly, deliberately, to kill her mother. Perry's voice rises with emotion. Nicholas Godejohn is not the mastermind here. He was manipulated by someone who learned manipulation from an expert. Her mother. Gypsy Rose Blanchard crafted this plan, recruited Nicholas to execute it, and then allowed him to take the fall while she negotiated a plea deal. The competing narratives are now established. The prosecution will argue premeditation and responsibility. The defense will argue diminished capacity and manipulation. The first witnesses are law enforcement officers who responded to the scene. They describe finding Dee Dee's body 5 days after the murder, decomposing in the June heat. They describe the blood, the positioning of the body, the violence of the attack. Crime scene photographs are shown. Graphic, undeniable evidence of brutality. Greene County Sheriff Jim Arnott takes the stand, his testimony measured but powerful. He describes the initial missing person report, the concern for Gypsy's safety, and the shocking discovery that she was not actually disabled. When we found her in Wisconsin, she could walk without any assistance, and she could do that very well, Arnott testifies. Things are not always as they appear. This was a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception. The prosecution calls forensic experts who process the DNA evidence. Blood from the crime scene matches Dee Dee. DNA on the knife matches both Dee Dee and Nicholas. DNA in the bathroom shows a mixture of all three, Gypsy, Dee Dee, and Nicholas. The physical evidence is overwhelming. Surveillance footage is played for the jury. There is Nicholas Godejohn checking into the Days Inn Motel in Springfield. There is Gypsy Rose meeting him. There they are together at the Greyhound bus station, buying tickets to Wisconsin. There is no denying their presence, their flight, their guilty consciousness. The prosecution introduces the confession video, Nicholas's interview with police after his arrest. The jury watches in silence as Nicholas admits on camera that he stabbed Dee Dee Blanchard. He describes going to the bedroom, describes the knife, describes the act itself with disturbing detachment. I did actually stab her, Nicholas says on the video, his voice flat. I admit it. The emotional weight in the courtroom is suffocating. Jurors shift in their seats. Some look away from the screen. Patterson calls medical examiners who performed Dee Dee's autopsy. They describe the 17 stab wounds, their depth, their location, their lethality. They testify that several wounds alone would have been fatal. 17 times was not necessary. It was overkill, they say, suggesting rage or determination. As the prosecution builds its case, the story of Dee Dee's last moments becomes horrifyingly clear. She woke during the attack. She screamed. She called out for Gypsy, not understanding that her daughter was feet away, hiding, allowing it to happen. The defense has a difficult task ahead. They cannot deny the murder. They must instead reframe it, make the jury understand Nicholas as a victim himself, someone whose mental limitations made him a tool in Gypsy's hands. Perry calls his own expert witnesses. Dr. Kent Franks, a forensic psychologist, testifies about Godejohn's childhood and mental disabilities. He has conducted extensive testing. Nicholas Godejohn has an IQ of 82, which places him in the low average range of intellectual functioning. Dr. Franks explains, he demonstrates autism spectrum disorder, which affects his ability to understand social cues, predict consequences, and regulate his behavior appropriately. Dr. Franks argues that people with autism often struggle with envisioning long-term consequences. They become fixated on immediate goals and desire. In Nicholas's case, that fixation was being with Gypsy Rose. He loved her, Dr. Franks says simply, and he would do anything to be with her, including murder. The prosecution counters with their own expert. Dr. Robert Denny, a clinical psychologist, testifies that Nicholas's autism diagnosis is questionable. He administered his own tests. Nicholas scored a 28 on the autism assessment, Dr. Denny explains. People who have autism spectrum disorder typically score above 32. While Nicholas may have some traits associated with autism, he does not meet the full diagnostic criteria. Moreover, Dr. Denny argues, having autism does not preclude understanding, right from wrong. Nicholas Godejohn knew he was killing someone. He brought materials to assist in the murder. He followed a plan. These are not the actions of someone who doesn't understand consequences. The medical testimony is technical and dry, but it is crucial. The jury must decide. Is Nicholas Godejohn responsible for his actions, or is he diminished in capacity? On the third day of trial, Gypsy Rose Blanchard takes the stand. The courtroom stirs with anticipation. She is brought from prison, wearing her inmate uniform, her hair longer now. She looks older, more substantial than the frail girl who had accepted her plea deal. Her testimony is the centerpiece of the defense strategy. Perry wants the jury to see Gypsy as the true architect of the murder, the manipulator who used Nicholas as her weapon. Ms. Blanchard, can you describe your relationship with Nicholas Godejohn? Perry asks. Gypsy's voice is quiet but steady. I met Nick on ChristianDatingForFree.com in October 2012. We started talking online and became close. He was my boyfriend. Did you keep this relationship secret from your mother? Yes. My mother controlled every aspect of my life. I couldn't have friends, couldn't go anywhere alone, couldn't do anything without her permission. And did you tell Nicholas about this control? Yes. I told him everything. How she made me pretend to be sick. How she forced me to use a wheelchair. How she kept me prisoner. And what did Nicholas say? He said he loved me. He said he would do anything to help me be free. Perry moves closer. Ms. Blanchard, whose idea was it to kill your mother? Gypsy hesitates, then speaks clearly. It was my idea. The admission hangs in the air. Even those who have followed the case closely are surprised by her directness. I told Nick that the only way I could be free was if my mother was dead. I asked him to do it. I planned it. I gave him the knife. Perry presses further. Did you consider other options? Yes. I thought about 3 possibilities. Either my mother would let me date Nick openly, but that would never happen. Or I would get pregnant, and then maybe she'd have to let me go. Or we would kill her. The courtroom is silent, absorbing this confession. Why didn't you go to the authorities? Perry asked. Why didn't you tell someone about the abuse? For the first time, Gypsy's composure cracks slightly. I tried to run away once, but my mother found me and brought me back. She told the police I was confused, that I didn't understand my own health problem. No one believed me. No one ever believed me. Patterson cross-examines, his approach clinical. Ms. Blanchard, you say you planned this murder. You gave Mr. Godejohn the knife. Where were you when your mother was being killed? I was in the bathroom with my hands over my ear. You didn't stop it? No. You didn't call for help? No. Your mother called out your name. She asked for help. You heard this? Gypsy's eyes fill with tears. Yes. But you did nothing. I was scared. I wanted it to be over. Patterson's questioning is designed to show that Gypsy, despite her abuse, still made conscious choices that led to murder. She could have stopped it. She could have called police. She chose not to. The prosecution also highlights another disturbing detail. After the murder, Nicholas testified that he and Gypsy had sexual intercourse in her bedroom, mere feet from where Dee Dee's body lay cooling. Gypsy testifies that this was not consensual, that Nicholas had told her he would rape her because she hadn't allowed him to rape Dee Dee before the murder, as he had fantasized about. This testimony is deeply disturbing and adds another layer of exploitation to Gypsy's story. Was she a victim even in this moment, or was this a detail crafted to garner sympathy? The jury looks exhausted, overwhelmed by the complexity of human darkness on display. As Gypsy is led from the courtroom, observers are left with more questions than answers. The defense has successfully shown that Gypsy planned the murder, but has this helped Nicholas or condemned him further? The final days of Nicholas Godejohn's trial focus on closing arguments and jury instruction. The attorneys make their final appeals, knowing that everything now depends on how 12 strangers interpret the evidence. Prosecutor Dan Patterson stands before the jury, his bearing confident. Ladies and gentlemen, the defense wants you to believe that Nicholas Godejohn is a victim, that he was manipulated, that his autism prevented him from understanding what he was doing. He pauses, making eye contact with several jurors, but the evidence tells a different story. Nicholas Godejohn communicated with Gypsy Rose Blanchard for over a year about killing her mother. He asked detailed questions about Dee Dee's bedroom, her sleeping habits, the layout of the house. He traveled from Wisconsin to Missouri with materials to commit murder. He accepted a knife from Gypsy. He entered that bedroom knowing exactly what he intended to do. Patterson's voice rises, and he stabbed Dee Dee Blanchard 17 times, not once in a moment of passion, not twice in panic. 17 deliberate, fatal wounds. That is not the action of someone who doesn't understand consequences. That is murder. He reminds the jury of the confession, the DNA evidence, the surveillance footage, the testimony. Nicholas Godejohn is guilty of first-degree murder. The evidence demands this verdict. Defense attorney Dwayne Perry approaches the jury with a different energy, empathetic, pleading. Nicholas Godejohn fell in love. He fell blindly in love with a woman who had learned manipulation from a master, her mother. Gypsy Rose Blanchard crafted this entire plan. She identified Nicholas as someone vulnerable, someone who would do anything for her, and she used him. Perry presents his client as someone who lacks the capacity for true premeditation. Nicholas has autism. His IQ is that of a child. He couldn't envision consequences. He couldn't understand that killing someone would separate him from Gypsy forever, not bring them together. He was used. The defense attorney's voice breaks slightly. Nicholas Godejohn loved Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and that love was weaponized against him. He deserves mercy, not a life sentence. After 4 days of testimony, the case is handed to the jury. They deliberate for approximately 2 hours, a remarkably short time for such a complex case. When they return, the verdict is unanimous. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of armed criminal action. Nicholas Godejohn's face shows little emotion as the verdict is read. His attorneys slump slightly in their chairs. The prosecutor allows himself a small nod. First-degree murder in Missouri carries one sentence when the death penalty is not sought: life in prison without the possibility of parole. In February 2019, Nicholas Godejohn returns for sentencing. Judge David Jones presides over the hearing, listening as Nicholas is given the opportunity to speak before his sentence is pronounced. Nicholas stands, his voice shaking. When this whole thing happened, all I ever really wanted was to be with Gypsy Rose Blanchard. I fell in love. I know they say love is blind, and I admit it. I was blind in love. He looks at the judge, his eyes pleading. I never knew what it was like to have motherly love or a close relationship with any woman. That's always been a missing link for me. That's the reason why I fell so deeply into this situation, where I fell in love so deeply. His voice cracked. I'm asking for mercy. I know what I did was wrong, but I was trying to help someone I love. Judge Jones listens impassively, then delivers the sentence. Nicholas Godejohn, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. For the crime of first-degree murder, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For armed criminal action, you are sentenced to 25 years to be served concurrently. The gavel falls. Nicholas Godejohn, 29 years old, will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Outside the courthouse, prosecutor Dan Patterson addresses the media. We're very pleased with the outcome of the Godejohn case today. While these two defendants, Gypsy and Nicholas, got two very different sentences, they also had very different roles and came from very different backgrounds. Reporters press him on the disparity. How can Gypsy, who planned the murder, receive 10 years while Nicholas, who was arguably manipulated, receives life? Patterson's response is measured. Gypsy Rose Blanchard spent 24 years in a prison created by her mother. She suffered abuse that most of us cannot imagine. Nicholas Godejohn, while he may have developmental issues, was not subjected to that same level of control and abuse. He made choices. He traveled to Missouri. He committed the act. Justice required different outcomes. The public remains divided. Online forums explode with debate. Some argue that Nicholas received too harsh a sentence, that he was indeed manipulated by Gypsy and deserves the same mercy she received. Others argue that Gypsy's sentence was too lenient, that planning a murder should carry equal or greater punishment than executing it. The case becomes a touchstone for broader societal debates about mental health and criminal responsibility, about abuse and victimhood, about how the justice system weighs competing claims of suffering. Documentary filmmakers rush to tell the story. HBO releases Mommy, Dead, and Dearest in 2017, featuring interviews with both Gypsy and Nicholas. The documentary presents the full scope of Dee Dee's deception, including footage of Gypsy speaking in the high, childlike voice she had been trained to use, even though her natural voice is entirely normal. In 2019, Hulu releases The Act, a dramatized limited series starring Joey King as Gypsy and Patricia Arquette as Dee Dee. Arquette wins an Emmy for her portrayal of the manipulative mother. The series brings the case to an even wider audience, sparking renewed interest and debate. Gypsy Rose serves her sentence at Chillicothe Correctional Center, where she slowly builds a life that is, paradoxically, more free than anything she experienced before prison. She is allowed to walk, to socialize, to make her own choices within the structure of incarceration. In prison, she meets Ryan Scott Anderson, through a prison pen pal program. They marry in 2022 in a small ceremony behind bars. It seems, for a moment, like a happy ending, or at least a hopeful new beginning. But life, as always, is more complicated than fairy tale. In 2024, Gypsy and Ryan divorce. The reasons are complex, tangled in the same issues of control and autonomy that have defined her life. Meanwhile, Nicholas Godejohn remains in Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri, serving his life sentence. His attorneys file multiple appeals, arguing ineffective assistance of counsel, arguing that his autism was not properly presented to the jury, arguing that he deserves a new trial. In 2023, Judge David Jones denies a motion to vacate the conviction. The appeals continue, but legal experts believe they have little chance of success. Nicholas Godejohn will almost certainly spend the rest of his life in prison. On December 28, 2023, exactly 8 years after she and Nicholas murdered Dee Dee, Gypsy Rose Blanchard walks out of Chillicothe Correctional Center at 3:30 in the morning. She has served 85% of her 10-year sentence and has been granted parole. The media circus is immediate and overwhelming. Gypsy's release becomes national news. She appears on talk shows, gives interviews, and launches social media accounts that quickly accumulate millions of followers. Her first Instagram post, First Selfie of Freedom, receives over 6 million likes. The public's appetite for her story seems insatiable. A new reality show, Gypsy Rose, Life After Lockup, premieres on Lifetime in 2024, following her adjustment to life outside prison. In prison, Gypsy had researched factitious disorder imposed on another, the condition experts believe her mother had. She told reporters that Dee Dee exhibited every symptom. I think she would have been the perfect mom for someone that actually was sick, Gypsy reflected. But I wasn't sick. When asked if she regretted what happened, Gypsy's answer was complex. My mother didn't deserve what happened to her. She was a sick woman, and unfortunately, I wasn't educated enough to see that. She deserved to be where I am, sitting in prison, doing time for criminal behavior. She continued, if I had another chance to redo everything, I don't know if I would go back to when I was a child and tell my aunts and uncles that I'm not sick and mommy makes me sick, or if I would travel back to just the point of that conversation with Nick and tell him, you know what, I'm going to go tell the police everything. The weight of what ifs hangs heavy in those words. Rod Blanchard, Gypsy's father, has remained in her life throughout her incarceration and release. He had continued paying child support for years, even as Dee Dee isolated Gypsy from him and told neighbors he was an abusive drug addict. None of it was true. He had tried to visit, but Dee Dee always changed plans, always had reasons why it couldn't happen. After Gypsy's release, Rod and his wife welcomed her into their lives. They supported her transition to freedom, though they acknowledged the complexity of their feelings. Their daughter had participated in murder, but she had also been a victim her entire life. The case continues to raise difficult questions about justice and mercy. Gypsy's attorney, Mike Stanfield, later reflected on the first time he met his client. She got out of breath, walking from the elevator to the interview room, maybe 75 yards. She was malnourished and physically frail. I can honestly say I've rarely had a client who looks exceedingly better after doing a fairly long prison sentence. Prison is generally not a place where you become happy and healthy. That tells you everything you need to know about just how bad what Gypsy was going through really was. In Springfield, Missouri, the house on Volunteer Way where Dee Dee Blanchard died stands as a reminder of the tragedy. Neighbors who once rallied around the Blanchards, who donated time and money and compassion, must now reconcile their memories with the truth. The sweet girl in the wheelchair was never sick. The devoted mother was a captor. Everything they believed was a lie. Some neighbors feel betrayed. Others feel foolish for not seeing the sign. Still others feel grief for Gypsy, for Dee Dee, for the waste of it all. The charitable organizations that help the Blanchards have had to grapple with how Dee Dee exploited their generosity. Habitat for Humanity built a house for a fraud. Make-A-Wish granted wishes based on fabricated illnesses. The Ronald McDonald House provided accommodations for unnecessary medical treatments. These organizations have since strengthened their verification processes, requiring more documentation, more proof. But they also recognize that helping people sometimes means accepting the risk of being deceived. The alternative, refusing help to everyone out of fear of fraud, would be worse. Sheriff Jim Arnott, who led the investigation, reflected on the case years later. It's kind of what movies are made of, that very twisted information that you don't see it coming around the corner. When the information came in, you were like, how is that possible? The case has changed how medical professionals approach suspected cases of factitious disorder imposed on another. Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, the neurologist who had noted suspicions about fabricated illness in his records, has spoken about the difficulty of challenging a parent's claims when a child is present, especially when the child appears to corroborate the parent's story. Medical conferences now include training on recognizing and reporting suspected FDIA. Social workers receive education about the sign. The hope is that future gypsies might be identified and helped before their situations escalate to violence. But the question remains, what should Gypsy have done? She was a prisoner in her own life, unable to convince anyone of her reality. She tried running away. Dee Dee found her and convinced authorities it was confusion from her disabilities. She tried living with the situation. It became unbearable. She tried forming a relationship with someone who might help her escape, and that relationship became the mechanism of her mother's death. There were no good options, only terrible ones. On December 28, 2024, exactly 1 year after her release from prison, Gypsy Rose gives birth to a daughter. She names her Aurora Raina Urker. The baby represents hope, a new generation free from the cycle of deception and abuse. Gypsy posts about motherhood on social media, sharing the joy and challenges of raising her daughter. Her followers number in the millions. Some admire her resilience. Others question whether someone who participated in murder should be celebrated. The debate continued. Nicholas Gojan, 36 years old as of 2025, remains in Potosi Correctional Center. He has no release date. He will die in prison unless his ongoing appeals succeed, which legal experts consider unlikely. Some advocates argue that the disparity between Nicholas's sentence and Gypsy's represents an injustice. They point out that Nicholas, with his developmental disabilities and low IQ, was arguably as much a victim as Gypsy, manipulated by someone who had learned manipulation from an expert. They argue for resentencing, for mercy, for recognition of his diminished capacity. Others argue that Nicholas made a choice. He could have refused. He could have contacted authorities. He could have helped Gypsy escape without killing Dee Dee. Instead, he chose violence. He stabbed a sleeping woman 17 times. That choice, they argue, merits a life sentence. The truth, as with everything in this case, is complex and resists simple categorization. In the end, the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case stands as a modern parable about the masks people wear, the prisons that exist within families, and the terrible prices paid when suffering exceeds the limits of human endurance. It is a story about a mother who loved her daughter in the most toxic way imaginable, by making her sick, by keeping her helpless, by ensuring she would always be needed. It is a story about a daughter who loved her mother, but loved freedom more, who made a choice that can never be unmade. It is a story about a young man who fell in love with the wrong person at the wrong time and paid for it with his life. It is a story about a community that tried to help but was deceived, about medical professionals who suspected but did not act, about a society that failed to see what was happening behind closed doors and cheerful Facebook posts. Most of all, it is a story about the complicated intersection of victimhood and violence, about how trauma can transform people into things they never intended to become. Dee Dee Blanchard is buried in Louisiana, near where she grew up. Her grave is simple, mostly unmarked by visitors. Few people mourn her. The community that once celebrated her devotion now remembers her as a cautionary tale. Gypsy Rose Blanchard lives in Louisiana now, rebuilding a life that is entirely her own for the first time. She can walk where she wants, eat what she wants, make her own decisions. She is no longer defined by wheelchairs and feeding tubes and fabricated illnesses. But she is also no longer defined solely by her victimhood. She is a woman who participated in murder. She is a mother now, responsible for another life. She carries the weight of what happened on June 9, 2015, and she will carry it forever. In interviews, she has said she is glad she went to prison, not because she enjoyed it, but because it gave her time to understand herself, to heal, to become someone who could function in the world without the distortions Dee Dee had imposed. Nicholas Gojan has no such path forward. His story ends in a cell, will end in a cell, defined forever by the worst thing he ever did. The courthouse in Greene County, Missouri, has moved on to other cases, other tragedies, other mysteries. But those who were present for the Blanchard proceedings, the judge, the attorneys, the journalists, the observers, remember it as unlike anything they had encountered before. One of the most extraordinary and unusual cases we have seen, Prosecutor Dan Patterson had said. The words echo still. A perfect encapsulation of a case that defied expectation and easy judgment. The Facebook page, Gypsy Blanchard, the shared account that posted those fateful words, "That bitch is dead," remains online as a memorialized account. The post has been shared over 109,000 times. Comments from concerned friends, written before they knew the truth, are still visible. "What? Did your FB get hacked? I have never heard you talk like that," one person wrote. "If only it had been that simple. If only it had been hackers, strangers, anyone other than the two people who had seemed so vulnerable and in need of protection." The case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard reminds us that things are not always as they appear, that behind images of devoted mothers and sick daughters can hide unspeakable abuse, that acts of violence can emerge from acts of desperation, that justice must sometimes balance punishment with mercy, even when the scales refuse to settle evenly. It reminds us that we are all capable of being deceived by others, and sometimes by our own assumptions about how families should look, how love should function, how far someone can be pushed before they break. And it reminds us, finally, that courtroom secrets can reveal truths about human nature that we would prefer not to confront, truths about the prisons we build, the masks we wear, and the terrible distances between who we are and who we are forced to be. The gavel has fallen. The sentences have been served or are being served. The story continues to unfold in real time as Gypsy builds her new life and Nicholas serves his permanent one. But the questions remain, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. What is justice when everyone is both victim and perpetrator? What is freedom when it comes at the cost of another's life? What is truth when every fact has been wrapped in layers of deception? The courthouse in Springfield holds no answers, only records. The rest, judgment, understanding, mercy, belongs to each of us who hears the story and must decide what it means.